Alright everyone out there in guitar land, Mike Hedding here, coming to you today with an intro lesson to 3 common movable chord shapes that are used all the time in rhythm. They're used in solos. There's a ton of stuff you can do with these 3 movable shapes. You might be familiar with them, but we're going to do a little overview of each of the 3 shapes and then some common exercises you can do to get familiar with them. This is a huge topic, so I won't be able to dive into every aspect of it in this lesson, so that's why we're calling this an intro lesson. We're just going to get familiar with the 3 shapes, dive into them a little deeper, and then in future lessons we'll talk more about expanding these shapes into leads, into modifying them into different chords. There's so much stuff you can do with these, and this might be a connection to something you've already learned. Maybe you learned a solo up the neck and you weren't really sure where those notes were coming from. And this might be a way to connect that in your mind that, oh, okay, I'm playing out of that movable position. That's a very common idea in bluegrass and country music. It's called playing out of the chord shape, where you're using these chord shapes as a basis to take a solo, to play rhythm. That's very common in bluegrass and country music. Super important to know. And what do I mean by a movable chord shape? So movable means no open strings. So some of the chords you've maybe been learning if you're a beginner have lots of open strings, right? So open strings have pros and cons. One, they're a little bit easier. You get a nice full ringing sound, which is kind of the pros. But the cons are you can't just move an open chord up a fret. You know, it doesn't become a new chord. Whereas if you take a movable chord, so a chord without any open strings, now I can move it wherever I want on the neck, and my left hand can stay in the same shape, and now I'm playing a different chord. So that's super powerful if you start playing in trickier keys, maybe without your capo, like B flat or A flat, any of those flatted keys. You know, some of the ones you might not see as much, but you can also use these movable shapes to play other versions up the neck. So maybe someone down here is playing a G. Now I can play a G here or here or here, and that's what we'll break down in this lesson. So let's jump into shape number 1. So shape number 1 is, I refer to it as the F shape. Nothing particular about that name, but it's basically, I think it's called the F shape. It's because the lowest one you can do is the F down here. So let's do it in G though to start. So I think that'll make it easier to just kind of be applicable, because you might not be playing a lot of F chords, but this one's called the F shape. So we're going to start with our index finger on the 3rd fret of the top 2 strings, the 1st and 2nd string, and then I've got my middle finger on the 3rd string, 4th fret, and then either my pinky or 3rd finger, if you want to do the full chord, let's do our pinky on the 5th fret, and then we've got our ring finger on the 5th fret of the 5th string. If you want to do the full bar, you might know this bar chord shape, but a lot of times with these movable chords, and what we're going to practice is, you don't have to push down all the strings. So what you can do is modify your right hand, and this is another benefit to learning these shapes, is instead of always hitting all the strings, you can hit 5 strings, you can hit 4 strings, you can hit 3 strings, you can hit 2 strings, you can hit 1 string. So really good right hand practice as well, and we'll break that down a little bit in the exercises. So get used to seeing the shape this way, or maybe this way, or even this way. All the same idea, we're just using different fingers and strumming different strings. Okay, so that's the F shape. You can move it up 2 frets to A, you can move it up B flat, B, you got C up here, and if you go up 2 more, you got D. And that one, as you get higher up the neck, I usually let off fingers. It's a little bit easier. I think it gets kind of tight quarters up there. So the other thing you can do, back to our G I remember the G is that these 2 fingers are at the 5th fret. Otherwise, you can remember it with your index finger is at the 3rd fret. That's another way. So either way. The other thing you can do is you could practice playing the chord, you know, just the lower strings or just the higher strings. Like I said, you can do any combination, or you play the 3, just the strings 4, 3, and 2. That's really good right hand practice. You could practice cross pick. Do the lower strings. That's a really good G shape if someone's doing this one, and maybe they've already got this one covered with some strumming. You could come up here and play this chord shape. So that's the F shape. You can practice moving that around. You can go up to your C at the 8th fret with your index finger, and then 10th fret with your index finger for a D. That could be a little exercise you could do. You could go slide, slide, back to C. I'm just practicing moving that around. It doesn't matter what chord, just G, C, and D obviously is a nice little chord progression you can practice. You could do it on the middle strings. Slide up. Doesn't matter what picking you're doing with your right hand either. Just practice sliding between the shapes. You can do it on the low strings. You could even do it down here if you want to do the full bar. That'd be like power chords. So just get familiar seeing this shape. This was a really eye-opening thing for me, is you don't always have to put down all the fingers. A lot of times you might see a little solo shape that's just this. Something like that. Like especially on like electric guitar. Maybe a second guitar is doing something like that. And they're just playing the top 3 strings, but rather than having to think of those all as different chords and so many shapes, if you think of this as all as just the F shape, and then you're just doing different variations on that F shape, it's going to be so much less to remember. Okay, so that's the basic F shape. One other thing I might do with that shape is practice taking a lot of times like your third and pinky finger off and just moving them around to different strings and see what those notes sound like. They might not all sound perfect, but you can just kind of hear how those different notes sound. Because this eventually will be a little solo shape that we can break down in a later lesson. So you can do something like that where you're just practicing moving those fingers around. The other thing is maybe you do like something like that. So I'm just practicing. Anytime I learn a new shape, I basically practice taking 1 or 2 fingers off and just kind of moving them around and seeing what sounds I can get. And I'm basing that out of my shape. That's where playing out of the chord shape comes from. Okay, so that's like an intro to the F chord. So remember, the F is down here at the 1st fret. You've got G, A, B, C, D. You can keep going up, E, F, all the way back up to G, and it starts over way up here. It gets a little tight up there, but you can do it. Maybe even just using 2 fingers at that point. But that shape gets repeated all the way up the neck. You even have the flats, right? A flat, A, B flat, B right to C, D flat, D, E flat. So you can do any of the 12 you can play in any key using those movable shapes. So that's shape number 1, the F shape. Let's look at shape number 2. This one's commonly referred to as the D shape. That's what I call it. It's going to be based out of your D chord down here. And same idea, there's going to be different ways you can play it. So let's do it again with G, just to get to keep playing in the same key. So the G version is going to be the 7th fret with your index finger, 7th fret on the 3rd string with your index finger. You're going to have your middle finger up on the 7th fret of the 1st string, and then your ring finger on the 2nd string, 8th fret. So it's this D now moved up here. And there's a couple different ways you can do this depending on what strings you're trying to play. Another way you might do it is this way, and then grabbing your ring finger down here on the 9th fret. So then you have 9, 7, 8, and then your pinky can go all the way down on the 10th fret. pinky can go all the way down on the 10th fret. It's a little hard to get all the strings. You can, if you want to, you can bar your first finger and try and get them all. But what I do is just pick which strings I'm going to play, and then I just play the shape. So you could even do this one right there. You could do this one. You could do this one. There's a couple different variations on that. So that's the D shape. So that's our G position D shape. So you can move that one up to C up here, D way up here, or your D is down here. You got E right here. This is a very common one for like country music. You might see that one. You got F here, G. So that, what I think of that one is the root note is on the 2nd string. So that's the 8th fret, or down here on the 10th fret. You also have the root on the 5th string. So I'm always basing that off the root note. So the root in the F shape, I don't know if I broke that down, is the 3rd fret on the high E or the 5th fret on the 4th string. So your root notes are the 4th and 1st string for that one. For the D shape, your root is on the 2nd or 5th string. Okay, so that's the D shape. Again, practice taking one of your fingers off, maybe like your 3rd finger, and moving it around. See what you can come up with. I'm just practicing hearing those shapes and visualizing this shape. You know, I could practice strumming the 3 strings here. Like I said, I could practice cross picking. Maybe I go down to D. C. Or you can do it, this is a very common shape as well. So that's the D shape. And then lastly we have what's commonly referred to as the A shape. So if you took this A chord, that has open strings, right? And you moved it up 1 fret, you would need to move your E string up 1 fret, so that's where you get the 1st fret. So I've got 3, 3, 3, 1. That would be like the full bar chord. You might have seen that. You might do it this way as well. That's our A shape. So we've got basically our A chord here, and then we have to add our 1st finger on the 2 frets behind the A chord. Just like this one is, that note is 2 frets behind these notes, so that's where you get that note. So this would be a C, this would be a D, and then your G is way up here at the 12th fret. That's a good one to remember. And that one, the root is on the 3rd string. So your root is on the 3rd string, and then also on the 5th string. So if you want to get these lower 2 strings, you got to do a bar chord there. But like I said, a lot of times I might even just play the top 3 strings like that. That's a very common position. Something like that. So that's the A shape. So you've got C here at the 5th fret. You've got D7, E here, F, G. You just move it around wherever you want. Like I said, the root is on the 3rd string, so whatever note that is. Okay, so those are the 3 shapes, the F shape, D, and A. Those are what I call them. And the other thing that's important to remember is that they always go in a pattern. So the first exercise you could do is stay on a G, but play through all the shapes. You could just go on like a loop. So I'm going F, D, A, D. So they always go in that pattern. F, D, A, and then back to F. Way up there. So that's, if you can remember F, D, A, that's the pattern they always go in. So you could do picking, or strumming, that's a nice way if you have a long section of G rather than just staying on one shape. Now you can move around. You're still playing a G chord the whole time, but you can get a little bit of movement. You could do it here, you know, and then go down to this one, and then down here. So what I recommend is saying F, D, you know, and just getting them in your head. D, F, D, A, you know, just keep repeating it until they really sink in. So that's one exercise you can do. Another exercise you could do is take like a chord progression G, C, D. So we were doing that earlier, right? But that's staying in the same shape. So I'm going F shape G, F shape C, F shape D. But that requires a lot of jumping around the neck, as you can see, right? But we have another shape closer. So I could go F shape G to my C shape, or my A shape C, excuse me, A shape C right here. And then I've got my A shape D right here. And then I could go to my D shape G. So see how I could make a little picking pen. Or right here, I could go D shape G to F shape C to F shape D to A shape G. So you don't have to use the same shape the whole time. You can mix up those three shapes. So I could go, like I said, F shape G, A shape C, D shape C, or A shape D. You got to keep saying them out loud. A shape D, and then D shape G. And then maybe an F shape C, F shape D, A shape G, maybe D shape C, D shape D. You could really mix them up, you know, then you got your F shape G way up there. But see how I'm doing that? You could do it with all the shapes. Do it down here. That's very powerful once you get that down. You can start combining those shapes, and then you're always closer to your next chord when you combine the shapes. So I don't want to overwhelm you for the first lesson. I just threw a lot at you, obviously. So practice that. Practice cross-picking, practice strumming, practice moving your fingers around a little bit. Practice, what I would practice most is visualizing the chords as, you know, 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3 fingers, 4 fingers, because you're going to see those in different contexts. And what I want you to do is initially see those as all the same shape, rather than having to remember all these different things. That's just your F shape to E chord, whether you're doing it this way, this way, this way. You know, your D shape, whether you're doing it this way, this way, this way. Same thing with your A. You know, it'll be so much less to remember if you just can remember those 3 shapes, and then you get into that shape, and then you can start playing solos, you can start playing rhythm, you can start playing backup, a whole bunch of stuff that we'll break down in future lessons. All right, hopefully that helps you out. Good luck and keep picking.